Welcome to the West Virginia Legislature on the West Virginia Channel. I'm Beth Voorhees. This morning we bring you a public hearing before the House Committee on the Judiciary. At issue is the Constitutional Convention of the States. Two House bills in this regard. House Bill 2424, providing a procedure for West Virginia to select delegates to an Article 5 convention for proposing amendments to the Constitution of the United States of America. And House Bill 4449, creating the Compact for a Balanced Budget. Also, House Concurrent Resolution 36, applying for an Article 5 Amendments Convention to propose a constitutional amendment. We will bring you this public hearing this morning as soon as it begins. Also, floor sessions in the House and Senate will also be conducted today, and you can watch them here on the West Virginia Channel. Also, Monday morning, we will bring you another public hearing before the Committee on the Health and Human Resources in the House at 8:30 in the House chamber. A public hearing regarding Senate Bill 10, creating Unborn Child Protection from Dismemberment Abortion Act. But that's Monday morning. This public hearing this Saturday morning is about the Constitutional Convention of the States.
to the issues that we'll be considering. We have 14 speakers based on the time available and allowing for a little bit of time at the end of the proceeding for questions. Each speaker will have up to 3 minutes to speak. We'll call you alternatively, so we'll have somebody at the podium, and we'll call the person who's going to follow that person, so you can be as close to the podium as comfortable, and that way we won't have a lot of lag in time between speakers. We're going to try to alternate as best we can. We don't have an even split on pro and con speakers, so we'll alternate as best we can between those who signed up as pro and those who signed up as con. In the past, we've made no effort to define those two terms, but we have had some people that seem to be confused as to which side they're on or what pro and con means, but we may have to we may have to modify our procedures in the future. As I said, there'll be 3 minutes allocated to the speaker. If you'll notice at the podium, there's a box with a red light on it. That will indicate to you when your time is up. So please wrap up your comments as soon as you see that light come on, and otherwise we'll have to ask you to stop and in the middle of a sentence perhaps. So please keep that in mind, and keep in mind that as a courtesy to other speakers, don't use more than your time. I would ask those of you who do speak, if you're able to, stick around till the end of the speakers, and there may be questions from members of our committee for you concerning your comments. Also, if you have written materials you wish for the committee to consider, if you would bring them to our clerk, who's the gentleman here on my left, or one of our assistants, who's the lady here on my right, and leave those documents with them. We'll make sure they're disseminated at the time we take up one of these bills. Our first presenter today is Tara Martinez. I believe that's right. Ms. Martinez, would you come forward, and you will be followed by Donna Holstein.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, committee members. Thank you so much. Today I'm here because the Center on Budget and Policy respectfully opposes House Concurrent Resolution 36, House Bill 2424, and House Bill 4449. A constitutional convention would endanger our most cherished civil liberties and system of government. Please do not authorize West Virginia to be part of what triggers such debilitating actions to our country's foundation. According to one of the nation's most esteemed constitutional law scholars, Professor Lawrence Tribe of Harvard Law School, a constitutional convention would put the whole Constitution up for grabs. The question as to the lack of procedures exceedingly outweighs the possible outcomes to convening a convention. Another of our nation's foremost constitutional law scholars, Erwin Chemerinsky, recently wrote that no one knows how the convention would operate. After all, the Constitutional Convention in 1787 began as an effort to amend the Articles of Confederation, and the choice was made to draft an entirely new document. Simply put, there are no rules governing a Constitutional Convention. This is one reason we ask that you refrain from advancing this measure. There are no guideposts or rules to prevent delegates from lowering the threshold of or going beyond the purpose for which it convenes. At the most recent convention in 1787, for example, attendees rewrote the rules for ratification. Indeed, they rewrote the entire governing charter and reduced the number of states needed to agree to the new Constitution. Professor Tribe explained the following questions that have no agreement to them. May a state application insist that Congress limit the convention's mandate to a single topic or single amendment? If Congress can call a convention independent of state application, as Professor Sandy Levinson argues it may, then how could state applications possibly constrain a convention's mandate? If applications are constraining, then how are applications proposing related but different topics to be combined or separated? Are they added up or not added up? When do you hit the magic 2/3 of states submitting applications? May the convention propose amendments other than those it was called to consider. May Congress prescribe rules for the convention or limit its power in any way. May the convention set its own rules independent of Article 5 for how amendments that it proposes may be ratified, which is what the Philadelphia Convention did. The Philadelphia Convention was called under. It risked too much to discover the answers to the above questions after the fact, and the legislature might have answered a couple of these questions in their own mind, but do we trust that other states have answered to our level of scrutiny? There's too much at stake to risk putting the entire Constitution up for wholesale rewrite as part of a constitutional convention, including all of the civil rights, protections, and liberties that we enjoy today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Martinez. Donna Holstein, who will be followed by Betty Rivard.
Good morning. Thank you, Chairman and committee members, for being here today to listen to this very important subject. I'm here to speak in favor of an Article 5 convention to rein in our out-of-control federal government. What if you were able to spend $1 million every day, $360 million a year? How long would it take you to spend $1 trillion? 2,740 years. As of yesterday, the U.S. national debt was $19,022 billion, and it's gone up over $1 billion since last night. That's almost $59,000 per U.S. citizen and $159,000 per U.S. taxpayer. If that's not bad enough, unfunded liabilities, including Social Security, Medicare, and federal pensions, are estimated at over $100 trillion. And as our deficit spending continues, which will be $616 billion this year, the future of America looks bleak. Our country is broke. It's not broke in 50 years, or 25 years, or 10 years. It's broke today. Congress has mismanaged our finances so badly that we have sold our children, our grandchildren, and even our great-great-great-grandchildren into perpetual debt slavery. Burdening future generations with our current obligations is unethical and immoral. Something must be done now. This great country has been through much and has overcome much, but if we don't act now and rein in our out-of-control government spending, this great nation will eventually surrender to financial debt, bankruptcy, and ensuing fiscal chaos. I believe that if we act now, our impending national debt crisis could still be avoided or at least eased a bit. Sadly, however, Congress and the President currently have neither the political will nor the ability to cooperate in a bipartisan manner sufficient to gain control of the nation's reckless and wasteful spending. So what can we do? The founders knew the federal government might one day become drunk with the abuses of power, and they gave us a tool to fix it. The tool is Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution. Washington, D.C. is broke. The federal government is spending this country into the ground. We cannot trust those in power to fix it on their own. They have proven time and time again they are not up to the task. A balanced budget amendment must be added to the U.S. Constitution. 49 states have it, including West Virginia, and our federal government needs it. We must force our federal government to rein in spending now. Every American, every day, they make tough choices around their kitchen tables. Americans must decide, what do I need and what can I afford? Government must do the same. I'll end with this. The government cannot provide anything to anyone without first taking money from someone else to pay for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Holstein. Betty Rivard, and she will be followed by someone who signed up as the pig.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm Betty Rivard, and I'm an independent advocate. I oppose any bill or resolution related to a constitutional convention of the state. I'm the granddaughter of immigrants from Eastern Europe and the daughter of New Deal Democrats dedicated to public service. A family friend helped develop Social Security and was cabinet secretary under LBJ and the father of Medicare and Medicaid. I am a social worker emeritus and worked for the state for 25 years. And I'm also a photographer and editor of a book called New Deal Photographs of West Virginia. I'm a graduate in political science and a lifetime devotee of the Constitution and our system of government. My first cousin is a law school dean and co-editor of a book on the history of the Constitution and how important it is to us now. I can't imagine what life is like without this basic respect for our constitutional government. Any proposal for a constitutional convention of the states puts all of this at risk. The only known is that we would face at least a decade of division and litigation in a chaotic environment. West Virginia is not like any other state. We all have long-standing connections and mutual respect for the dignity of each person. No one can come in and buy that or take it away from us. And I want to give a recent example. In the last week, the Senate Judiciary Committee had a meeting about the public defender system. They consulted experts, they understood the complexity, and they stepped back to study further. There were no politics. Everyone was helpful. There was a very respectful discussion. The issue of a constitutional convention of the states is not a West Virginia issue. We need to step aside and deal with our own real problems. Delegate Hanshaw in the subcommittee for this Judiciary Committee asked if the issue is worth the risk. I respectfully suggest that for me at least, the answer is no. And just for a minute, I want to channel Senator Byrd, hold up the Constitution. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rivard. We have a representative from COS, and he will be followed by Ted Bettner.
You're afraid to say the name, right? Check, baby, check, baby. First off, Convention of States, not a constitutional convention. Amendments have happened, and they have happened over the course of our existence. Who do you trust? Do you trust the states to make amendments, or do you trust the federal government who screws up everything they touch? Our existence in West Virginia is even charity, and it's charity that comes from the federal government, and that charity is a joke. They send us back 35% more money than we send them. And now, as we suck at the government teat, the only thing that comes out is poison. There's nothing left. We run amok with spending. It's insane. You can sum this thing up really quickly with a series of questions. Is the federal government out of control? Anyone? Yes, it is. Hey, yes, the federal government is out of control. Will the federal government control itself? The answer is no. Republicans have had opportunities to do it. Democrats have had opportunities to do it. No one has done it. They just spend. Some spend more than others. They don't care. All they care about is their cronyism, sending pork back home, and it's absolutely unsustainable. I mean, we're going to wind up being the new Rome, or we're going to be Greece in more recent history if we keep spending the way we are. We're going to have hyperinflation. This is insane. We cannot continue to do what we're doing, and it can't be fixed. Do you think it could be fixed at the ballot box? No, there's not time. Do you think the young voters coming out will be able to fix this? No. They'll be playing their PlayStations, and eventually they'll learn a little bit about government, but it'll be too late. Article 5 was put in the Constitution for a reason, And it was well-reasoned. These were smart people who put this thing together. There's not going to be a runaway Congress. That is an absolute myth. That's not what we're doing. Everyone, if we agree to certain items, all the states agree to certain items, then that's what you're talking about. Or you're going to have mass chaos within the people. It is controlled. I would challenge anyone to a public debate on video at any point that you want to debate this matter. I will talk to any of you folks for as long as you would want to talk on this matter. You know, whatever it takes. It's too late. We can't fix this by normal means. So we have to do what our founders put in the Constitution for us to do, or we're done. You heard the numbers from Donna a moment ago. We're through. We have to have a convention of states. That's the only way out of this, and it has to be controlled, and it will be. That's all I got for you people. Rock and roll. Huh? Yeah, baby, you got it. Me and that guy.
Thank you. Ted Bettner, followed by Helen Gibbons.
Good morning. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak here. Instead of focusing on the pitfalls of the Article 5 Convention, which others will touch on, I'd like to reserve my testimony for why a constitutional balanced budget is fraught with serious problems, dangers, and especially myths. We need to get our facts straight, exactly what's going on before we make these decisions. The biggest risk is to our economy. A BBA, a balanced budget amendment, would ensure that future economic recessions are deeper and longer because it would force federal policymakers to cut spending or raise taxes, or both, when the economy is already weak and in recession. Just to give you an example, if the United States had passed the BBA in 2011, then balancing the 12 budget would have had a catastrophic effect on our economy. In 2012, the federal budget were balanced through spending cuts, it would have required $1.5 trillion in spending cuts. According to Macroeconomic Advisors, one of the nation's prominent private economic forecasting firms, I'm sure you've seen them on other news broadcasts, a BBA would have thrown 15 million people more out of work, would have doubled the unemployment rate from 9 to 18%, and would have caused the economy to shrink by 17% instead of 2%. Proponents of the BBA also often claim that families and states must balance their budget every year just the same way as the federal government does. And this is something at the center we look at every single day. We just did a report on the budget. Both are very poor analogies. Most families do not balance their budget, and for good reason. For example, a family takes out a student loan or obtains a mortgage will in essence be running a deficit by spending more than it earns that year. However, we know a college education is a smart investment that pays off over the long term, and that home ownership is an important investment. The same can be said of a business. If a CEO of a company went to the board and announced that while the company's lost money, it was going to pay off all of its debt, the corporate board would laugh that CEO out of the room. As a CNBC article on corporate debt explains, Wall Street doesn't seem to care if companies are carrying debt on their balance sheets, as long as they are putting that money to work. Smart companies will incur debt if that debt has a return on the investment. This is also the case with government. In addition, families often save money and draw down those savings in the event that someone loses a job or becomes ill. A constitutional amendment would bar the federal government from spending any money that has been saved because the government could not spend in more than it brings in that year. While most states are required to have a balanced budget, 49 states except for Vermont, a state balanced budget refers to operating budgets, not capital. West Virginia has a deficit every single year. Every year. We have over $1 billion in debt in infrastructure and school construction and land, all sorts of things. State spending on all of these things, and plus the state has a rainy day fund as well, which under a BBA would count as new spending. If you spent money of that rainy day fund, that would count as new spending as well. Plus, the federal government, unlike the states, is responsible for national defense and security, and the automatic stabilizers, such as unemployment insurance, that are imperative to protect workers and businesses during economic downturns. There's also huge technical problems when implementing a BBA. Who would enforce it and how? If the budget is not balanced, what happens? Would the president have unilateral power to cut spending and raise taxes? What about the Supreme Court? What's their interpretation? These things have not been figured out. While no one argues that the federal government shouldn't be more prudent with its money, a balanced budget does almost nothing to address the underlying problems that
Excuse me, Mr. Bettner, please wrap up your comments.
Okay. And I just wanted to close by saying that, a huge swath of jurists, economists, policymakers, and scholars on both sides, American Enterprise Institute, a very conservative think tank in D.C., is against the balanced budget amendment. And just to think that you can constrain it to one topic, just look at Senate Concurrent Resolution 210 that says it's going to hold it to a single issue and then mentions 3 issues in the same resolution. Even that resolution can't even hold it to a single issue.
Thank you, Mr. Bettner. Helen Gibbons, followed by Charlie Spencer.
Good morning. I represent the League of Women Voters, and we have recently had some studies on constitutional conventions. The League believes a constitutional convention should be called only if the following conditions are in place. The Constitutional Convention must be transparent and not conducted in secret. The public has the right to know what is being debated and voted on. Representation at the Constitutional Convention must be based on population rather than one state, one vote, and delegates should be elected rather than appointed. Voting at the Constitutional Convention must be by delegate, not by state. The Constitutional Convention must be limited to a specific topic. HB 449 includes West Virginia joining a compact for a balanced budget amendment. This compact subverts the idea of a democratic constitutional convention. Delegates to the convention should be elected by the people. The League also opposes a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution because it would damage the economy, not strengthen it. Demanding that policymakers cut spending and/or raise taxes, even when the economy slows, is the opposite of what is needed to stabilize a weak economy and avert recessions. Such steps would risk tipping a faltering economy into recession or worsening an ongoing downturn, costing large numbers of jobs while blocking worthy investments to stimulate jobs and growth and address the nation's urgent needs in infrastructure and other areas. A balanced budget requirement is a recipe for making recessions more frequent, longer, and deeper, while requiring severe cuts to vital programs, including Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, veterans benefits, and many other programs Americans count on. A responsible deficit reduction plan must embrace both spending cuts and new revenues, including curbing special interest tax loopholes, not a one-sided reliance on spending cuts. A balanced budget amendment has no place in the Constitution of the United States. Our Constitution has served the nation well because it represents enduring principles that are the foundations of our government. It should not be used as a substitute for real leadership on fiscal policy. Because there are many unresolved questions about the powers and processes of an Article 5 Constitutional Convention, the League urges West Virginia to be careful in its calling for a Constitutional Convention. We thank you for the opportunity to voice our concerns.
Thank you, Ms. Gibbons. Charlie Spencer, who will be followed by Rick Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Charlie Spencer. I'm a volunteer with the Convention of States and just a private citizen from Boone County. A lot has been said already about the I don't like that term constitutional convention because the Constitution specifically calls it a convention of states for the purpose of calling amendments, proposing amendments. Right now, our nation is living under a continual constitutional convention. Every day, unelected judges, bureaucrats are changing laws, changing all kinds of things. Just the other day, we lost Justice Scalia. We're one justice away from having a 5-justice majority that could just do away with any amendment in the Constitution. They've shown the propensity to do that already. The biggest thing that I would like to mention right now is, it's been mentioned that the Constitutional Convention of 1787 was a runaway convention, and nothing could be further from the truth. The claim that the delegates disobeyed their instructions is based on the idea that the Congress called that Congress called the Constitutional Convention. Proponents of this view assert that Congress limited the delegates to amending the Articles of Confederation. A review of legislative history clearly reveals the error of that claim. The Annapolis Convention, which preceded the Constitutional Convention, not Congress, provided the political impetus for calling the Constitutional Convention. The delegates from the 5 states that participated in Annapolis, they called for the Constitutional Convention, and then each of the states, as their legislatures, decided to send delegates to it. The Articles of Confederation didn't have a proposal or a way to amend the Articles of Confederation. So the states, as sovereign territories, sent their delegates, and they gave them specific instructions to bring about a constitution that could make this country work better. They didn't go there with the intention of amending a few things of the Articles of Confederation. They went there with the intention of changing everything, and they did, and that was their intent, and that they were told to do that by the legislatures of each state. During the Constitutional Convention, George Mason thought it prudent to bring up the possibility of the states calling for a convention, because they had already approved the possibility of Congress proposing amendments, but he as their founders were genius, they looked into the future and they saw that even republics, especially democracies, become tyrannical over time. And unless the people, through their local representation, had the ability to to propose amendments, none would be passed, or none would be proposed that would limit Congress or limit the federal government. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Spencer. Rick Wilson, followed by Gary Zuckett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The United States Constitution has served us well since it was first debated and cobbled together in the hot summer of 1787. Its creation has been called the Miracle in Philadelphia, and it's been described pretty accurately as a machine that would go of itself. It's a bit different from many other machines in that its framers designed it to increase rather than reduce friction through an elaborate systems of checks and balances. The resulting mechanism isn't always pretty to watch, but it's provided the nation with both the stability to endure and the adaptability to adjust to changing times and unforeseen situations. As the great conservative English political thinker Edmund Burke put it, a state without means of some change is without means of conservation. Burke was someone who advocated a cautious approach to major changes. As he understood it, the social contract that binds a nation together over time is best seen as a partnership not only between those who are living, but between those who are living, those who are dead, and those who are to be born. Unfortunately, some measures now under consideration could threaten that multi-generational partnership. A number of groups are pushing for resolutions calling for a convention of states that could open up our founding document to major changes, an unprecedented step since the Constitution was ratified. It reminds me of a story of a child who was fascinated by the beauty and accuracy of a Swiss watch with its tiny springs and gears, who tried to take it apart and see how it worked. It never worked again. While some proposals would open up many changes to the Constitution, others are more narrowly focused on things like a balanced budget amendment. Proponents of such an amendment often compare the national budget to a household, but that's an analogy that doesn't work. Unlike the federal government, most households don't get to decide how much their income will be, nor do they control the money supply. Further, many households engage in controlled debt to pay for things they cannot with current earnings, such as home mortgage or higher education. A balanced budget amendment could harm economic growth as well as national security by limiting the ability of governments to make needed investments deal with depressions and recessions, and respond to national disasters and threats to national security. Those concerned about debt and deficits have other less drastic means to deal with these, like statesmanship. As the late Senator Robert Byrd once said, "I support a balanced budget and I want to lower the federal deficits, but the answer must not be to perform a lobotomy on our nation's most sacred principles of checks and balances and separations of powers simply because we're frustrated." Finally, I think the last word I'd like to quote goes to the late Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, who said, "I certainly would not want a constitutional convention. Whoa, who knows what would come out of it." Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Gary Zuckett, followed by Glenn Neal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Gary Zuckett. I'm Executive Director of West Virginia Citizen Action. And we stand opposed to all three of these proposals. And the reason is basically two words: unintended consequences. Unintended consequences. Despite the good intentions of the promoters of these proposals, we feel that both a constitutional convention and the content of these resolutions and bill present serious risks to our government and our economy. The legislature should prevent any resolution calling for a constitutional convention or bill laying out the process to do so from being adopted at this session. We have a proven process for amending the Constitution that works. It's been done many times. We've had many amendments. There have been good amendments. Some of the good amendments didn't pass, but we've dealt with amendments to the Constitution. We can do that. And we have, opinions on both sides, from both sides of the aisle, against this type of idea. The last speaker quoted Justice Scalia, and just thinking about the fact that we can't even agree on how to replace him in this country right now makes me wonder what a constitutional convention of the states would look like. Here's another quote that I can use. There is no enforceable mechanism to prevent a convention from reporting out wholesale changes to our Constitution and Bill of Rights, and that's former Supreme Court Justice Arthur Goldberg. So, considering this, I would ask you to oppose any proposals for a constitutional convention of the states. Whatever your opinions are about a balanced budget amendment, we all agree that the U.S. Constitution is the backbone of our democracy, and that any attempt to risk the foundation that has provided our country for our country is misguided at best and dangerous at worst. Remember those two words: unintended consequences. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zuckett. Glenn Neal, followed by Jesse Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, honorable delegates, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Glenn Neal, and I'm a volunteer with the Convention of States. I'm here to give qualified endorsement to the Balanced Budget Amendment. Qualified only in the sense I wholeheartedly support a balanced budget amendment, enthusiastically. But I want more than that. We've had a death on the Supreme Court and Justice Scalia, which brings into focus a really important thing. And I ask the question, who do you want to amend the Constitution? Because the Constitution is being amended. Who do you want to do it? Delegates that you appoint and are answerable to you? Or do you want 5 old lawyers on the Supreme Court, any one of which may be senile at a given moment? Jonathan Turley, a distinguished law professor from Georgetown University who appears frequently on TV, has noted that he's written an article posted online about every 10 years a Supreme Court justice becomes either senile or so physically incapacitated they can't really do the business of the court. Another law professor who has written an extensive law review article on the same Subject is David Garrow. The justices have life tenure, and I don't have any problem with that. But there's no mechanism for getting them off the court, except in the case of Scalia, where somebody dies. Who do you want amending the Constitution? In the year 2000, Dickerson v. United States was a Supreme Court case in which the court said, we can overrule Congress, we can overrule any law that we choose to. In Atkins v. Virginia, the Supreme Court said, we bring our own judgment to bear and ask whether we should agree with the judgment reached by the Congress and the people. That's not the Supreme Court's role. And your only chance of changing that is to have a more general convention that not only considers a balanced budget amendment, but also restraints on the Supreme Court. We've got to have 5 old lawyers, any one of which may be senile on a given day, writing the Constitution. Roe v. Wade was a constitutional amendment. Before Roe v. Wade, a woman did not have a right to have an abortion. After Roe v. Wade, a woman did have a constitutional right to have an abortion. Now, you can call that by whatever name you want, but that is, in fact, a constitutional amendment. They put something in the Constitution that wasn't there before. I support BBA, and I hope you will vote on that up. But in the alternative, I also hope you will consider, there's a Senate Concurrent Resolution 10. Sorry, I'm trying to get my papers unstuck. Senate Concurrent Resolution 10 talks about a more general convention that would consider other things. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Neal. Jesse Johnson, followed by Bowajas. I'm going to spell that. Looks like B-O-W-A-J-A-S.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm Jesse Johnson. I'm a descendant of Mayflower and the Revolutionary War and the Civil War. I have the honor of actually helping start the first third party in 100 years in the state of West Virginia that has now survived as a mountain party for 15 years. I started my adult life as a first responder, and I'm here as a political first responder to urge caution. Caution. Because first I would ask, how many people remember President John Hanson, the first president of the United States? Well, remember, we declared our independence in 1776, and our first president was elected in 1781 from Maryland. And then in 1787, from May until September, we held the Constitutional Convention as we know it, and we elected what we now say is the first president of the United States, George Washington, who oversaw that convention, who fought against political parties, which has taken over our entire political process in this state, or in this nation, a theoretical two-party system, which is what we now know of as American history. Why? Because we've forgotten what happened prior to that Constitutional Convention. And that's the danger that we face today in opening that can of worms. John Hanson. Think about that. Then think about what's happening today. Today, we have an imperial governance in certain states. I don't disagree with the 10th Amendment and states' rights, but remember the last line of that, and the people. Vital to this nation is an adherence to that Constitution that we all agreed and ratified long before any of us were ever here. But we've worked within the confines of that, and we built the greatest nation on earth. I think that we need to be more adherent to that Constitution. I think that we need to listen to the people. I think that we need to level the playing fields of politics. But to take the risk that this country could not know, we could have college students and college grad students, as we do today, that don't know who the vice president is, or who we won our independence from, or who won the Civil War. We could end up with that same future where they don't know who George Washington was. They don't know what the Bill of Rights stands for. This is a very, very challenging question going forward. And absolutely, the consequence of unintended consequences is what we desperately need to focus on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Chalabawagas, I hope I pronounced that right. If not, you can straighten me out. And she will be followed by Jeff Kimball.
Thank you, Chairman Schott. My name is Chela Barajas, and I'm from Fallsview in Fayette County. The reason I've shown up so early on a Saturday morning is that I'm really concerned about opening the United States Constitution for changes through this process.
Could you speak a little closer to the microphone? I don't think it's picking you up.
Sorry. While changes to the Constitution may be necessary, in the United States we have used this amendment process through Congress and then state ratification. One great example of this, Amendment 19, is Amendment 19, ratified in 1920, which granted women the right to vote. Our Constitution has been the prevailing ruling document in our country since 1789. Since then, we have only seen 27 times that the document needed a revision, the last being in 1992. While the Constitution may be changed through a constitutional convention, we have not pursued this route in the history of our country. One significant reason is that a constitutional convention would open the entire document to changes. This is a very risky business that is hard to predict and control once the process is unleashed. I'm not here to debate the merits of a balanced budget for our federal government. There are lots of experts here that can talk about that. As you can see from my blue hair, I'm not a traditionalist. I would just urge you to consider how reckless this path must be if a nonconformist like me worries about bucking the tried and true path. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff Kimball, followed by Eli Baumwell.
Thank you, Chairman. My name is Jeff Kimball. I'm an attorney from Bridgeport, West Virginia, and I'm speaking today in favor of really any Article 5 effort to limit the power of the federal government, but particularly today in favor of 4449 with respect to the Compact for America. About 2 years ago, I became very interested in the Article 5 issues. I studied them all, and as a result of that effort, I came to the conclusion that CFA was the group that I would become affiliated with. I've been affiliated with that group for about 16 months now. And I think it was well stated earlier, actually, by one of the speakers against the Article 5 movement, who said, and I think she was actually maybe paraphrasing from Delegate Hanshaw, that the question is the issue worth the risk? And that's really what we've heard about today. We've heard about the issue and we've heard about the risk. That's what everybody's talked about. So that's what I'm going to talk about. Let's talk about the issue first very briefly. I think there are a lot of issues with federal overreach, but right now what the Compact is addressing is the balanced budget issue. It's the overreach in federal spending and borrowing. I coincidentally heard on XM radio on my way down here today an interview with Mrs. Ben Carson where she said that if we stopped borrowing money at the federal level today and started paying $10 million per day on the existing debt, it would take 5,000 years to pay it off. So rejiggering that math just a little bit, what that means is that even if we paid $100 million a day, it would take 500 years to pay it off, and that is without any additional borrowing whatsoever. That's the issue. Now, what's the risk? You've heard a lot of people talking about a lot of concerns over what might happen at a constitutional convention, how there are all these unknowns, and all these people in history have expressed concern about the proposition. That's why I chose the Compact to be the organization that I affiliated with. It uses Article 1, Section 10, compact or contract among the states, where the states come together in advance of any request for a convention. 38 states will sign on to the contract whereby they agree to everything. They agree to the exact language of their applying resolution requesting the convention. They agree to how delegates will be appointed. They agree to how delegate authority will be limited. They agree to how they will guard the various mechanisms in their agreement about how to guard against a runaway convention. They all agree to recall their delegates if they do anything other than agree to support the subject amendment. They all agree to that contractually in advance. Congress is actually co-opted in advance to call the convention upon the 38th membership, and then it is also co-opted to, in that resolution, send it to the states for ratification by the legislature. So all of these risks, as much as is possible, are eliminated by the compact approach. Nothing happens until the 38th state agrees. Even ratification is built into the compact. So I see my time is up. The bottom line is that pre-planning eliminates wasted time, and certitude eliminates fear. The founders intended the states to have a substantial role in the federal government. The 17th Amendment diminished that authority, but Article 5 still exists, and West Virginia should take its place among the states willing to exercise that authority to reign in the federal government. I support 4449, and I hope that it'll be passed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kimball. Eli Baumwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Eli Baumwell. I'm the Policy Director with the American Civil Liberties Union of West Virginia. The bills that we're discussing today pose a significant threat to our Constitution, including the Bill of Rights. I'm going to set aside the very bad idea of a balanced budget amendment. Others have spoken to that. Rather, I do want to speak to the idea of an Article 5 Constitutional Convention more generally. There is no constitutional provision, there's no federal law that leads us to believe that a constitutional convention under Article 5 can be limited to a single issue. Nor is there any reason to believe that a state can pass laws that limit delegates to a single issue that would be enforceable, that these laws would be enforceable. The fact of the matter is that the Constitution is very vague on how this procedure works. Courts would necessarily be involved in working out the mechanics and determining what, if any, limitations on a convention could be created and could be enforced. The only precedent we have for this is, as it was pointed out, an unlimited convention. That is the only precedent we have on it. Not only that, but we don't know, excuse me, I lost my place. We don't know exactly how it's working. Again, this is a concern that's been shared by a number of legal scholars, including the late Justice Scalia, including former Supreme Court Justice Warren Burger. If, or perhaps when we discover we can't limit the scope of the convention, nothing in the Constitution is safe. Delegates will be chosen differently in each state, and there's no safeguard to ensure they will be representing the will of the people. We live in a time where special and moneyed interests have significant sway over our political process. We may find that fundamental freedoms, including protecting speech, religion, privacy, even gun rights, are significantly different on the other side of a convention. I do want to address some of the comments today that I heard during the subcommittee meeting. Even here, we have heard from multiple speakers that they have concerns that extend beyond a balanced budget amendment. If we can't limit the scope of our conversation to a balanced budget amendment in a meeting held just for that, why do we expect that the same can be done in a constitutional convention? This method is no more democratic than any other method. When we elect the president, we expect them to nominate Supreme Court justices who have a responsibility to interpret our Constitution. When we elect senators, we expect them to vet and to confirm those nominations. When we elect our state representatives, how many voters do you actually believe think that those state representatives have the ability to amend the foundational document of the United States of America, of our federal government. I expect very few do. I expect that most people would not expect that this is not particularly democratic. Finally, I've heard from many people that concerns about the federal government's ability to address disasters or war can be dismissed because that can be written in, that a provision can be provided giving government extra spending powers in emergencies. But who declares an emergency? Those same federal legislators that we say that we don't trust. And when federal emergencies are called, civil liberties are further reduced. So we actually risk more civil liberties by giving this power to the federal government. That is what we risk. And even if you support the misguided policy of a balanced budget amendment, is it worth the risk to our fundamental freedoms? I say no, and that's why the ACLU of West Virginia opposes any constitutional convention. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Baumel. This concludes our presenters, and on behalf of our committee, I'd like to thank each of our presenters for your input today and for the respectful manner in which you handled your presentation as well as for other presentations. If you have materials that you have not provided for the committee's benefit, please be sure to give them to our clerk or our assistant here today. We have a couple of minutes. We might be able to take a couple of questions from committee members. If any members of our committee have any questions they wish to present to the presenters, please raise your hand and I will recognize you. If not, I would encourage the presenters to stick around, and there may be individual questions that would be asked. Any members of the Judiciary Committee have questions they wish to ask to any of our presenters? If not, thank you again for your involvement, and we are adjourned.
You've been tuned to a public hearing in the House chamber about the Constitutional Convention of States. 3 bills in this regard: House Bill 2424, providing a procedure for West Virginia to select delegates to an Article 5 convention for proposing amendments to the Constitution of the United States; House Bill 4449, creating the Compact for a Balanced Budget; and House Concurrent Resolution 36, applying for an Article 5 Amendments Convention to propose a constitutional amendment. These bills are before the House Committee on the Judiciary. We will be back at 11 o'clock for floor sessions in the House and Senate. Until then, I'm Beth Voorhees for the West Virginia Channel, a service of West Virginia Public Broadcasting.